we have two people who have flown in from Texas for the event. So it's amazing to have people here in New York to come all this way. We have a couples therapists, and their company is called Untamed Intimacy. They have some really unique and progressive ways about how to really break down a relationship and create more connections.
I'm Ani.
And I'm Lee.
And we're both intimacy coaches and psychedelic therapists. So a couple of questions for you guys. Are you guys down to play and make this interactive?
Yes. So we have everyone's enthusiastic consent to interact. Okay, excellent.
Awesome.
All right, yes. So I've got a couple of questions. One, by show of hands, who here loves experiencing pleasure? Pleasure of any sort. Could be sexual, could be non-sexual. Okay, pretty unanimous. This question, I'm looking for a couple of answers, 1 to 2 words. What do you all think contributes most to your pleasure?
What do you think is the key to experiencing more pleasure?
I heard energy. Okay.
Trust.
Good one.
Nice.
Respect, being present.
Communication.
Connection.
Chemicals.
Yeah.
The ambiance.
The ambiance. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Anyone else?
Experiences.
Yeah.
Feeling safe.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, my dear. You just segued us right into the talk.
So after working with thousands of people in the realm of intimacy, what we found is that the single greatest determinant of pleasure and just amazing sex, it actually comes down to safety. And so let me ask you another question. What does safety mean to you?
Condoms.
Condoms.
Okay,
There we
right
go.
on. Right on. Yes.
Anyone else?
Respect.
Yeah. Trust.
Trust.
Does anyone think no
No judgment.
There we go. Yeah. Anyone else? Freedom. Beautiful.
Excellent.
So the way we think of safety is the state of being completely open, right? When we're completely open, all of us is able to be here. All of our thoughts, all of our emotions, all of our fears, all of our desires, our deepest, most authentic expression. And there's no fear that any part of us is going to be rejected. There's no fear that any part of us is not welcome. There's no fear that we'll experience punishment, retaliation, shame, guilt, judgment for any part of us. And when we're in that state, we can think of that as the state of fundamental safety.
And safety, as many of you probably know, expands beyond this sense of physical safety or being out of physical harm's way. So many of you may have experiences with feeling emotionally safe or unsafe, sexually safe or unsafe, intellectually and mentally safe or unsafe. So we're making this a broad spectrum definition to include all aspects of us and our expression.
So how many people here, show of hands, are in a relationship? Keep them up, okay. And how many people here are single and dating?
Or single and
Or
not dating.
single and not dating, yeah. So when we think of sex, particularly in long-term relationships, when we're with someone for a long time, 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years, what do you think goes away for most people? Excitement, curiosity, novelty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you guys feel like you've associated sex with novelty, like the pleasure and thrill of sex? So I used to do this a lot, right? I had wired in novelty with the arousal that I experienced during sex. And the only way that I could get that arousal was by having sex with someone different, someone new, someone I didn't have a history with. But typically, when we have sex with someone for the first time, even though there's a lot of novelty, there isn't a lot of safety, right? And that lack of safety changes the experience. So when we have a deep sense of safety, and no novelty. It's kind of flat, right? The sex is, it's so familiar. We know this person, we know their moves, we know how they move, we know what sounds they make. When there's very little safety and a lot of novelty, think having sex with someone for the first time, a one-night stand, you're out at a bar, you meet someone, and you spontaneously decide to take the experience to the next level. You have a lot of arousal. It's a very high arousal zone, but there's probably very little safety because maybe you haven't really communicated as much, maybe you haven't really established a sense for the container you're about to experience together. So what we find is that even though in longer term relationships, we may have a sense of safety cognitively, with most couples, they haven't really done the deep work to establish what safety feels like to them. So I'm gonna invite you into a little exercise. So close your eyes if you'd like to play. And ask yourself this: what lets you know that you feel safe right now? What lets you know that you're safe right now? Just ask yourself if you know what it's like to feel safe. Get a really clear feel for this, and then open your eyes. What did you guys feel? A hug. Anyone else?
Or perhaps there was a lack of sensation.
Yeah.
Was there anything that let you know that you're safe because there was something that you're not feeling?
I mean, for me, it was like a rational thing. Just thinking about it, it's like just thinking about good communication. And,
Yeah.
I don't know, behavior.
Yeah.
Behavior that indicates safety.
Beautiful. So very cognitive, right? Anyone else?
Yeah, I think just a lot of communication, asking questions, checking in.
Yeah.
Are you happy with this? How do you feel about this?
Beautiful. Checking in. Anyone else?
No judgment.
No judgment. Calmness.
Calmness.
Beautiful.
People around you.
People
around
around
you.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Lacking physical sensations like rapid heartbeat, sweating, ache, things
Yeah.
triggering is like usually when I know I'm not feeling safe.
So
Right.
the absence of sensations that indicate a lack of safety. Beautiful. So what you guys just did was you basically went inside your bodies and you developed what is called interoceptive awareness. So inside your body, there is a sense of how you feel. And so for most people, we're used to creating safety cognitively. Well, I'm at a rooftop in Brooklyn and the weather's great and there's all these cool people around me
And there's wine.
and there's wine. I should feel safe. But often, even though we know cognitively that we should feel safe, with sex, sometimes we end up in situations where even though we should feel safe, we don't actually feel safe. What we find is that this gap between how we think we should feel and how we actually feel is the chasm between really pleasurable, present, connected sex and sex done in a state of dissociation.
I've got a lot of personal experience to speak to this, and I'm sure many of us do. And one of the most pivotal things that I had learned, particularly as someone who identifies as a woman, is that my safety is my responsibility. Often I would punt the responsibility onto someone else to make me feel safe. And as I learned to navigate my body and track what's happening inside through my own somatic awareness, that is how I began to create safety. So what we want to really share with you today, the juice of this and the climax, I should say, is how to track your own body internally, as well as how to track your partner or partners, whomever. You can do this with parents, siblings, romantic partners. And this is really, again, creating a sense of rapport and coherence with someone by being present with them. So having that awareness of ourselves and then having that awareness of others so that we can inquire into their experience and deepen intimacy.
Should we model something?
Let's do it.
Okay.
So we first want to talk about internal tracking. And this is something that I had a very, very hard time with. I've said yes to a lot of things that were a no, and that created a level of unsafety and self-betrayal inside. So I didn't feel like I could count on myself to create boundaries. So as I went on that journey, I did a lot of what Ani just modeled, and I would close my eyes and I would go inward, and I would just see what sensations are there. So even if you go inward right now, you can keep your eyes open or you can close them. Just notice if any sensations are there. You might even be aware of your booty on the seat, your feet on the floor, perhaps beadlets of sweat on your body or a breeze.
Maybe the temperature on your skin.
And as you become present to that, just notice if you're feeling any other sensations or if there are emotions that are present. Perhaps curiosity, excitement, joy. And as you become aware of what's here, because you are creating presence with it, you increase your ability and the opportunity to be able to vocalize these things and allow someone into your experience with you, creating a sense of safety for yourself and intimacy with others.
And now look around the space, look at someone else, and see if you can notice how they are in their bodies. Notice the different body language, notice different facial expressions, lips, eyes, feet. And notice that you can actually develop a pretty clear picture of someone else. And so when we've been practicing this with each other, what often happens is that the person who is less resourced, the person who feels less safe, typically does not have the faculties to know what's happening and to regulate themselves. And so automatically, the more regulated nervous system in the room has to take on the responsibility for the safety of everyone in the space. So if we're in a sexual experience and she, how would you describe some of those places they used to go to?
I would completely shut down. I would freeze. I would lose sense of words. Anything articulate would leave my mind. And I would often find myself in my head thinking, and this was even before you, but many moments where I would think, I don't want to do this, but I don't know how to say it. I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. I don't want them to think poorly of me because now I'm not doing what I agreed to do. So as I became aware of this, that is how I built the landscape to learn what happens for me in order to be able to communicate it with my partner.
So when someone doesn't feel safe, the first thing to go is expression. So typically what would happen with Lee was that her face would go blank. It would seem like she's not truly here. And that lack of presence is actually an indication that her system has moved into the sympathetic nervous system, and there's a high level of arousal and a low level of safety.
Not the kind of arousal we're looking for.
Right, this is the arousal of the nervous system. So there's 4 key states that the nervous system takes in terms of arousal. So state 0 is baseline, right? We feel safe, we're open, we're present, we're expansive, we can feel each other, we can connect. State 1, imagine you're walking down a dark alley and you just feel on edge. There's something, you contract a little bit, you walk a little faster. State 2 would be if someone jumps and tries to mug you, tries to attack you. And that's typically when you go into a state of either fight, when you think you can fight them off, flight, if you can't fight them off, you try to run away, or freeze. If both those options don't work, you go into a state of collapse. And so in those states of freeze, which surprisingly often happen during sex, the person who is experiencing the stress response or this trauma response doesn't have the ability to fully communicate, to fully speak to their needs. And so in those moments, safety becomes actually paramount.
Touche. So, something that we want to leave you with today is how to navigate those moments, whether for yourself or for a partner that you may be with, if you're sensing that that is something they're experiencing. So, the first thing we want to do, like Quinn so artfully mentioned, is come back to the present moment and come back to breath. Slow things down. So, we want to stretch out the experience so that we can have a sense for what's happening for us. Oftentimes, what has worked really well for me is to say, you know what, I need a moment. 20-second rule works wonderfully, just so that we can gather our faculties and be able to communicate, I need to take a break, I need a moment, I don't know what I want, is a perfectly good answer as well.
And something you can ask yourself is, what do I feel right now? What do I feel right now? What's present for me right now? And if you're with someone who seems to be in a stress response or a trauma response, you can ask them, hey, what do you feel right now? What do you need right now? And that often becomes a way to drop into a deeper level of intimacy once that person comes back to presence and you can reestablish that connection.
So the thought that we want to leave you with today and the sentiment that we want to leave you with today is that safety is really sexy and that your needs matter.
And you matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chatting earlier, you were talking about psychedelics
Yeah.
and how that you introduced that with your couples therapy. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that, I think that'd be really fascinating for the audience.
Absolutely. So, has anyone experienced or experimented with psychedelics here? A few people? Great. So, psychedelics we found to be, with the right person, in the right setting, structured in the right way, can be extremely powerful, particularly in the realm of sex, relationships, and intimacy. So what happens is, over time, we develop these walls between each other, right? And those walls are made of shame, different judgments we have about ourselves, about the other, these patterns of rigidity or behavior that became developed in our childhood and our relationship with our caregivers. And these walls basically create separation between us. So some psychedelics, MDMA is technically not a psychedelic, it's an empathogen, but they allow us to really drop into our heart. And they allow us to experience the state of unconditional love and connection and unity and oneness. And so what they offer, one of the things that they offer, is an experience of connection, is an experience of unconditional love that most of us have never experienced because love was always conditional for us. Another way we can use psychedelics is a lot of psychedelics allow the brain to go into a more plastic state. So there's a saying in neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So who we are today is a collection of neural circuitry that's been wired together to create the personality and the experience that we have now. So what psychedelics do is they warm up the brain and they allow us to create connections between different parts of the brain that weren't previously connected and offer us literally a new identity, a new perspective, a new frame of relationships. And the third thing that I'll mention is that they give us what I like to call a somatic pin, a somatic address. So pretty much everything we experience, we have a location for it in our brain, in our mind as well, and we have a reference point for it. So we have a reference point for safety, if we felt safe as children, right? We have a reference point for what it's like to be really free and fully expressed. We have a reference point for what it's like to sing in the shower and be blissed out. And so for most people who haven't had secure attachments with their parents, who hadn't had intimacy and love and connection in the right way modeled for them, don't have that somatic representation for what deep safety, deep intimacy is like. So what we can do with psychedelics is give someone a reference point for what this feels like, and once we know where that bodega is on the street, we can keep going back to it. So psychedelics, I would say, have completely changed the game for us personally and for the people that we work with, done correctly and in a safe environment, of course.
You were mentioning, is there a point where you're able to access that region in your brain you're talking about without them eventually?
Yeah, so pretty much every psychedelic experience is generated inside the brain, and people have all these crazy experiences where they talk to spirits and guides. But from our lens, anything that anyone experiences in a psychedelic experience is coming internally. So it's not something that's coming from the outside, because the brain is a closed box, right? We're all iPhones connected to the same iCloud, but what psychedelics offer us is a way to look at the contents of our experience, the contents of our psychology in our brain from a very different perspective. So whatever we experience in a psychedelic experience is coming from the inside, and therefore we can access that without the psychedelic. So there's all sorts of ecstatic states we can access through, say, breath work, right? And it provides an almost equivalent experience like being on LSD. Women are fortunate enough to be able to give birth, and what they experience right after they give birth as they're bonding with insanely high levels of oxytocin with their baby, that's the experience of MDMA. So this life offers us so many entry points into that same qualitative experience. Psychedelics are an express train to some of those places when done properly, but we can experience those things absolutely without psychedelics. There is one thing though, say MDMA, for example, allows a downregulation in the activity in the amygdala. It's the absence of fear, which allows us to work with deep trauma responses and traumatic memories in a way that's really hard to do without. Beautiful. Guys, thanks so much. I hope this was useful.
Well, slow it down, would you give it a rest? Covered in clouds of your regret. Why beat yourself up if you'll do it again? Let it all drift